This is so amazing for me to sit down and talk with you, Rick, because I've been a big fan of yours ever since, back in your AWA days. And I've followed your career for a long time. And we've been doing this wrestling show for 15 years, and we've never, ever had Rick Martel on before. So I'm completely stoked to talk to you.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Now, can we just start with how you got in the business? Because it's a really interesting story because your family was already in the pro wrestling business.
Yes, right. I had a brother who was already in, and he got me started. I was 17 years old. I back in June '73. I just finished school. School was out, and I had a couple of months off. And I was wrestling amateur wrestling, Greco-Roman style, and so my brother called me up maybe a week after I finished school, and he said, Rick, get on the plane, tomorrow you're starting professional wrestling, Sunday. And it was a Friday night. I said, oh man, I never really, wrestled professionally. Christ says, you'll do all right. I used to work out with him a little bit, and so I started in Nova Scotia back in June '73, and I wrestled that summer for 2 months, and it was great. I loved it. It was love, at first sight. I came back to school that in September, for the beginning of the next year, and I went to school that one day, and then that night I said, oh man, I can't do it. Wrestling is what I want to do and everything. So the next morning, I went to school and I went to see the principal and told him that I was finished. I was terminating my school days. And when I got home, my mom and dad, were really upset at my brother. So for getting me, giving me the wrestling bug, and but I never regretted one day since. And my parents later on, decided that maybe it was the best decision I made.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a smart one. Talk to me a little bit about how you learned your craft, because it really sounds like you were just thrown into the fire. Your brother just said, "Come on, you'll be good at it." How did you go about learning and training in those early days?
Yeah, well, thanks to the old timers, back at I was 17, so everybody was an old timer for me,
Mm-hmm.
So these guys, and my brother also, who on the side, would take me, we would get to the arenas early, and then I'd go in the ring with them, and I'd get a chance to work out with them, and some of the other guys would come in too, and help me out, and I was a really fast learner. I love professional wrestling. Ever since I was a kid, 12 years old, I knew this is what I wanted to do, and that's why I started doing amateur wrestling. And so I was watching a lot of it, and so it came. I guess it was a natural. And it took me just a few months, and then after that, I wrestled in Quebec, province of Quebec for a while, and then I went to Calgary, for Stu Hart,
right.
And then I went to the basement, the dungeon.
The dungeon.
Yeah, the famous dungeon, Stu Hart's famous dungeon, and but my brother warned him, and then not to stretch me. So I, fortunately, I never had the taste of it, and like some of the other guys, and but that's how I learned,
Right. Now, in those early days, Rick, because back then the business was very protective of itself, and they didn't let outsiders in. Did they wise you up to things early on, or did they just kind of throw you into it?
Yeah, well, you're right, Dan. Back then it was like really a close thing, and it was really well guarded, and they didn't. But the fact that my brother was in, and my brother also taught me, to respect, you're a kid and just listen, and be thankful and be respectful, and I guess attitude is everything. And guys kind of I got along with everybody because of that. I'll always be ready to learn and made sure that I was appreciative of everybody that was willing to give me a few points, a few advice, and so that's how I made my way. And eventually, didn't take me too long because in '75 I went to the States, and Kevin Sullivan saw me wrestle in Calgary. And I guess when I was in Calgary, a lot of guys coming from the States, they used to tell me, Rick, you should go to the States. You do great down there, but back then it was hard because of the visa problem, the working visa.
Yeah.
And so nobody would be willing to do that for me because I wasn't well known. But Kevin Sullivan was really plugged in with Florida wrestling, with the Grahams.
Right.
Mike Graham, he was a tag team partner with Mike Graham, and he knew Eddie. So he talked to Eddie Graham about me, and finally I received a letter, saying, okay, you're going to start on April 75. I went to Florida, and from there, I remember my first night, the Funk brothers, Dory and Terry, were in the dressing room. Jack Briscoe was the world champion at the time.
Wow.
And back in Canada, we used to see that in just a magazine, the pro wrestling magazines.
Right.
And now all of a sudden I was in the same dressing room with those guys, and that was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed that. And so that's where, it really took off for me back in '75, and then '76 I met Mark Lewin, who was going to go to wrestle in New Zealand, and asked me if I was interested, and finally I went there, and then I met the promoter from Australia, and then I went to wrestle Singapore and all these places, and it was really good for my wrestling career because I was able to go and learn on the other side of the world where and back then I was in New Zealand, Australia, and all those places. I was given the opportunity to wrestle main event, even though I was really young. I was like 19 years old, and I learned a great deal, and I wrestled a lot. And I learned a lot from King Curtis Iakia. This guy was fantastic. He had such a great psychology of wrestling, and I learned so much from him. So when I came back in '78 in the States, I was I was only 22 years old, but I was already 5 years in professional wrestling,
right.
and 2 of those years as a main event wrestler, and so I got I had some really great opportunities even at a young age.
No, yeah, absolutely. You had something, Rick, that the youngsters or the guys coming up in pro wrestling today don't have that advantage of being able to travel to different territories, go to somewhere like New Zealand and be able to hone your craft. I mean, you guys were very lucky in those days in that you were given the time to mature as wrestlers and performers.
Yeah, you're right, Dan. Absolutely. Because it's like, let's say, you take for hockey, National Hockey League. If there was no junior hockey or
right.
no American league, where would those guys learn? When they get to the national level, the pro level, now they learned all these. But now guys don't have territories, small territories where they can start, as a preliminary wrestler, and then work their way up slowly but surely. And when you do make it to the main event wrestling matches, you're a seasoned wrestler, and you know your craft really well, and all that. You don't learn that in the gyms. I don't care how many hours you put in a gym, in a wrestling school. You need to be in front of a crowd and situations to really learn the ins and outs of wrestling.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, getting back into the early days and working with some of these great guys that you learned from, like the Funks and that. I recently interviewed Stan Hansen and read his autobiography, which just came out last year, and he talked a lot about early on in that period as well that you and him had some early matches, and you guys established quite a friendship with each other.
Oh yeah. We that was funny because we were both, starting in Texas, we were both youngsters and, beginners in wrestling. And they would put out, Fritz von Erich, he was really the main event there. And he used to go on early, and us, we used to have to follow him. He'd put us after him,
right.
After the main event, we had to finish the night, and we had to go, a lot of times, draw, like we'd wrestle for like 30 minutes, after the main event. Imagine, so we learned a lot, and we were in some situation, him and I, it was great. We were really eager to learn and to do whatever we needed to do to satisfy the wrestling fans, and we created a friendship that lasted, throughout our career. And then eventually, when it came to the AWA and we wrestle each other, for the title and all that.
Right.
It was just a great continuity of our friendship and also our wrestling. I'm sorry, Dan. I speak French a lot, and I'm losing my words, but. We had a connection, him and I. We really got along in the ring and outside the ring.
Yeah, he tells some great stories in his book. What was it like when you were in there wrestling with Hansen? Because he had that real, like, no holds bars, I'm clubbing and I'm running right at you, and it must have been pretty crazy working with him.
Oh man, especially, even back when he was young, in 75 in Texas. He was a big man, and this guy, he had a lot of the wind, he could go on and on for, and at his weight, was unbelievable. And this guy he was stiff, when it hits you, and oh man, you'd be sore all over, But he was great because he would make it exciting, and that's what it was all about, to be exciting. And then when he came back with the AWA, he had just come back from Japan.
Yep.
And that's why Stan got over like $1 million in Japan because, over there they like that. They like a guy that keeps going and going and going. It's
right.
Like the rabbit and the battery commercial.
That's right. The Energizer Bunny.
He never stops. So he came back. I remember. I think it was our second match or something, and we were in Denver, and in Denver, the oxygen, it's really high there, the altitude.
Right.
So, you have to take it easy a little bit, work into it, and Stan was in the style, and I remember he comes to me and says, Rick, maybe we should take it easy tonight, because we're going to blow up, oh, sure, Stan, yeah, sure, and we go in there and boom, 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 right away, boom, boom. And then after the match, we both go to the dressing room and go, oh man, I thought you said you were going to take it easy. Jesus Christ. But there was his style.
Yeah.
And I remember I wrestled him at Chicago, the White Star Stadium, at the baseball stadium in Chicago.
Wrigley Field?
Yeah, right. And oh man, he just, he threw me outside. I remember we went into the crowd and then with the chairs and this guy's just hitting me all over. And but I enjoyed it because one thing for sure, he everything he did was believable, and I liked it that way.
He said in his book too that both of you were big fans of the Rolling Stones album Some Girls, and that you love the song Miss You.
Yeah, I do. Oh yes, I used to. Also, I wrestled, a lot when we were in Georgia in tag teams. Me and Tommy Rich against him and Ole Anderson.
Right.
And So I wrestled him quite a bit, throughout my career, at different stage of my career. And we were big wrestling Stone. The Stones, we loved them, and we used to sing that song a couple of times in the ring. With the we had some laughs about that.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm guessing it was really beneficial to work with a guy like Hansen early in your career to just prepare you for the different kinds of guys you're going to run across. I'm guessing if you could survive in the ring with Stan Hansen, you could probably survive with almost anybody.
Oh yeah. And the word I was looking for earlier was stamina.
Right.
Stan, he had that stamina. This guy, honestly, I haven't encountered anyone else. And you're right, Dan. When you wrestled him, you were ready for anybody. And I remember when I wrestled him in Japan also. And man, wow. Over there, he was like a lion. He kept going and going. But I seen him the last, I think it was like 2 years ago, and we hadn't seen each other for years, and it was such a great time to see him again. And I really have some really great memories, about Stan.
That's awesome.
And also a little anecdote, I sometimes I used to travel with him, and I never chewed tobacco, never in my life,
Mm-hmm.
And him, he was a football player, and back then, a lot of guys, the pro athletes, especially football and baseball, would chew tobacco,
right.
the snuff and stuff. So, say, Rick, says, how about trying that? You ever try that? I said, no. I said, no, come on, just try a little bit of it, And I threw that snuff, in my mouth, and all of a sudden, things started rolling around, it's like that Copenhagen, really strong stuff. Oh man, and that was his car, So all of a sudden, I opened the window and I puked. Then we were kind of going faster, so all the puke went on his car and all that. So it backfired on him,
Oh.
So,
that's hilarious.
He didn't like that too much.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Now, the reason I knew a lot of this stuff is that Stan Hansen just did his autobiography. Just quickly here while we're on this, have you ever thought about writing a book at all, Rick, about your career? Because, you covered so many different areas and you did so much. I think an autobiography on your wrestling career would be pretty amazing.
Yeah, somebody got in touch with me last year, to do that, and not right now, but maybe later on there might be a thing that I might, be considering,
Yeah, I think it would be a very good idea.
I was, because I covered because I started in 73 and then went through the 80s and the 90s, and I saw wrestling evolve. It was unbelievable. From what it was when I started
right.
to what it was when I finished and what it is now.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. I remember back in the 80s. I remember. Guys that retired old timers from the 70s would come in, and the dressing room sometimes would go in different towns, and they say, "Oh man, what is this wrestling stuff?" All the gimmicks and all that stuff. Little did they know it was just the beginning of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It really went into something special, but that was great. I'm really happy that I was part of it, and it really changed the wrestling world. It was completely different from the old days, back when you had the small territories and all that.
Yeah. No, when Vince McMahon took it national in the 80s, that was the beginning of a whole new era for professional wrestling.
Yeah,
sure.
Vince McMahon, a lot of guys knocked him, and he did this and did that. But to me, as far as I'm concerned, I'm very grateful that Vince McMahon came in the wrestling scene, and because he took wrestling, from being, like I said, regional little territories to national and then to national, and we were able to instead of because I remember in the 70s, guys would be in the territory with their families, and all of a sudden, you had a dispute with a booker or something. Guys had to move all their family and get in a new territory, and the kids had to go to new school and all that. But back, when Vince came on the scene, guys were able to have their family in one spot and then take the flights and fly in and out of their the towns they lived in, and were able to have some kind of family life. At least, that was great. And also, as far as the money, thanks to him, we were able to make some great money.
Yeah.
Not as great as the guys that are making it now, compared to what we used to make, but still, it was a big step from the money we were making back in the days,
Right.
So, I'm really thankful of Vince McMahon, what he did for wrestling.
Now, let's talk about the first time that you were in the WWF, and I'm guessing that would have been Vince Sr. that brought you in that time, right? In when you were tag teaming with Tony Gurria?
Yeah, he was a commentator back then. I worked for his dad.
Yeah. So how would you compare Vince Sr. with Vince Jr. and how they worked with talent?
Well, very different. Vince Sr. liked everything. It was like a routine type. Every year, every month, it was the Battle Royals. It was very like a cycle.
Right.
That he was used to do, and never really taken any chances. But he was successful. Back then, WWF was one of the top territory.
Right.
With the AWA and with Vern Gagne, it was like so. He was successful. So, and this guy, he lived a good life. He used to be living up north in in the summer, and then go down to Florida in the summer. The winter, and he was satisfied with that. But there's one thing, Vince Senior. This guy was really a class act. What a man, and a man of his word also.
Right.
He would tell you one thing, and man, you could count on that no matter what. So I really enjoyed working for his dad. One of the best promoter I worked for.
So talk a little bit about your time with when you were tag teaming with Tony Gurria and stuff like that. I'm guessing it was a pretty big deal for you to be in the WWF at that time.
Oh yeah, it was fantastic. When I walked in there, of course, Bruno Sammartino and all these guys, that I had learned about, and then all of a sudden, I was traveling with them and being in the same dressing was really, and also the crowds, wrestling at the Garden, Minnesota Square Garden, back then, it was like the Mecca,
Right.
Of live sporting events, all the boxing thing, Muhammad Ali and all that stuff, and to be there and wow, the crowd, your reaction and all that was fantastic. The Boston Gardens, and all these buildings on the East Coast, the big towns, and you were wrestling all of a sudden in front of 15,000 people almost, and a couple of times in the weekends and stuff, and then during the week you'd go to Pittsburgh and all these big arenas. So it was a big change from the other territories, where opposed to AWA had pretty big crowds too, but they didn't have those big buildings that the East Coast had.
Right.
So in that sense, it was really a great opportunity to wrestle in front of those big crowds. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about Tony Gurria, because a lot of the younger fans wouldn't know who he is. Here's a guy. He's still working for Vince McMahon today, is he not?
Yeah, no, he just retired. Just a couple of months ago.
Oh wow! So there you go.
Just now, and is finally gonna enjoy life. I mean, not as he wasn't before, but now he has some time, you know, to because he still has a home in New Zealand, and you know, and he has some grandkids and stuff, and he's deserved some time. He deserves some time now, but Tony, you know, he was he was a WWF tag team champion several different times,
right,
with different partners,
right,
and he was a great agent too, and him and I bonded right away in 1980 because I had wrestled in New Zealand, and when we met, I had wrestled with his brother, you know, and I knew guys that he knew, you know, from New Zealand, and right away, you know, we started talking about these towns and all these places, different buildings and different guys. So we became friends right away, and still to this day, you know, Tony, I go to visit Tony in the States, and he comes sometime in the summer come to visit me, and we still have a really close friendship. You know, the Tony's like a brother to me. When I lost my brother in 1978 because of a wrestling accident, and
in Puerto Rico, right?
I met Tony like 2 years later. I met Tony 2 years later, and Tony is like almost the same age as my brother, and he became like a big brother for me, you know, and he gave me a lot of advice and stuff, and still he's the guy that had me at a young age invest in real estate, and he gave me some great advice, and I'll always be thankful, you know, for the advice he gave me, and as far as wrestling, Tony was kind of a leader, you know. I remember when we wrestled the Samoans, you know, we had just wrestled them in Philadelphia, and I remember the match didn't go so well, you know, for different reasons, and I remember Tony kind of took command, you know, and said, "Hey, look, man," he says, "we got to get off our asses and do this and do that," and you know, we all said, yeah, you know, we got to do this certain way instead, and you know, he was great. That's why he became, you know, a good agent.
Right.
Also, you know, he has a good wrestling mind, and so I, you know, I really a lot of respect for this guy.
Now, when you left the WWF in 1982, why was that? Was it just time to move on to a new spot, or why the change?
Yeah, well, you see, Dan, I was doing really well with WWF, you know, in 80. You know, I mean, Vince McMahon Sr. Really liked me, and I was doing really great. And all of a sudden, I got a call from Nick Bockwinkel, you know.
Right.
I'd wrestled him in Hawaii, in Honolulu, Hawaii. In 78, I'd wrestled him, and we had some fantastic matches. He was the AWA World Champion at the time, and we really had some, you know, at the Blaisdell Center in Honolulu. We tagged the place a couple of times and had some great matches, and all of a sudden he called me up. And he said, "Look, Rick, Vern is looking for a babyface, and he has a really a good spot, and I think it filled it, you know, perfect." And so I said, "Well, it's, you know, so I'm doing great here, you know." I said, "Well," and that was his words, and I still remember it to this day. He says, and you know, and so Nick says, "Well, my boy," he says, you have to think of, you have to take care of tomorrow's business today.
Yeah.
So, you know, in other words, you know, he says, "Look, you know, I know you're doing well now, but you have to think about, you know, your future." And so I did take that chance. So I went there, and turned out to be you know, a great move.
Yeah.
But I was bittersweet because I really enjoyed wrestling for WWF back then. You know, it's like a family. You know, with Lou Albano and all these guys. It was like a big family, and I really enjoyed that atmosphere. And I'll tell you, Dan, the atmosphere that was in that territory in those years was the best atmosphere that I had in any other wrestling days. You know,
really,
it was really like a big family type thing. You know,
wow.
It was really great.
Wow. It's funny that you say a family. I can't picture an uncle like Fred Blassie or something like that.
Yeah. Oh man, these guys, they were just and the ribbing, that was going on. As you know, Freddie Blassie was a well-known ribber. He used to rib guys all the time, and we had a ton of laughs. And it was never a dull moment. Never ever a dull moment.
Right.
There was always be a lot of ribs and here and there, and the guys were having a good time. Wrestling is hard work, but when you have a few laughs with it, it's great.
Well, it's I guess it's the kind of you work hard and then you play hard.
Exactly, that's it.
Now, when you got to the AWA, was the plan right from the beginning to make you the champion, or it was something that they kind of worked for? Or did they want to make you champion like right away?
No, it wasn't at all. I mean, I went in there, and of course, I remember my first few matches. I imagine it was my first time there, and I had to replace Hulk Hogan in the main events because he was wrestling in Japan, and something happened where he had to stay a few more days. So I remember I replaced him in those my first three matches. I replaced him in Minneapolis, I replaced him in Winnipeg, and I replaced him in Denver.
Right.
And I was wrestling against Nick those nights, and so it was a tough way to get in. But it went really well, and I guess Vern really liked the way I worked. I was a really hard worker. I gave always more than 100% in there, and did what I was asked to do, and did it to the best way I could, and so he liked the way I wrestled, and so the opportunity to become the AWA came later, because I remember I had been there for I think a year and a half, and so I. My wife was from Quebec also, and we were kind of missing our family a little bit, her and I, and I gave my notice to Vern to come and wrestle in Montreal, in Quebec for a while. So Dino Bravo is a good friend of mine,
right?
And I was coming here, and him and I were going to wrestle together and all that. So I did, and after maybe a few weeks that I was here, I got a call from Nick and saying, "Hey, look, Vern wants to meet you. He had something really, really good to, something big he wants to talk to you about, And so I flew in, and we met, and then he was talking about, he was looking for somebody to fill in the shoes as a world champion, and there was this thing he was doing with Japan, and with Jumbo Tsuruta, and I never met Jumbo, and so he asked me if I was interested, and of course it took me 2 seconds to say yes. It was the greatest opportunity, and also in the fact that I'd be wrestling Jumbo Tsuruta, who at the time was one of the top 3 men in Japan, and so. So I decided to we moved back to Minneapolis, and then I became world champion, and so
did it surprise?
I was world champion for 19 months, so it was a really good time for me, and.
Was it a surprise when Vern wanted to put the title on you? Because you were very young. You weren't even 30 years old yet.
Yeah, it was. It was, a surprise. And also, you have to remember, Dan, that back in those days, now you had the AWA doing really well. We were really drawing some big crowds, and you had the Road Warriors there, and a lot of big names, and doing fantastic. But you had the WWF that was lurking around the corner. They were looking to take over, and so I guess what I'm guessing, he wanted somebody he could depend on, and and me, loyalty was very So I was a bit surprised because, I said, I'm sure, he would have other candidates that could have done really well with it also. So I was pleased that he did pick me, and one thing for sure, while I was champion, I worked really, really hard, and I had some great matches and all over, and I think it came out well.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about your AWA title reign is that you actually had several matches with Ric Flair, who was the NWA champion at that time. And I thought, this is me as a youngster seeing this in the wrestling magazines, I thought that was pretty amazing to see the two promotions working together like that.
Yeah, you see, there was WWF was coming around, and these guys, the NWA and the AWA, wanted to form an alliance,
right.
And in fact, we went on the East Coast, the Meadowlands and all this stuff, with NWA and AWA combined. So they wanted to maybe unite the title, at one point. I remember we were at a meeting, with all the promoters from the NWA and Vern and myself and Ric Flair and at the big table, and everybody was talking plans, and and I came out of that meeting, saying, oh wow, because there's some great ideas that came out of it, and if he would have done all of that was said that night, I'm sure he would have succeeded. But as you know, promoters, everybody was wanting to pull the blanket for themselves,
right.
And instead of uniting, they were trying to find a way where they could, what's in it for me, and,
right.
and what am I going to get out of this? And everybody, there was no trust there, and unfortunately, they tried it, and it didn't work because they couldn't trust each other.
Yeah, I believe Vince McMahon.
But, and then came that. That's why. Sorry, Dan, I interrupted you. That's why it came the matches between the two world champions, and it was a really fantastic time. And I saw Rick a couple of years ago, at a wrestling event, and we talked about our match in Japan. We were so happy with the crowd reaction, because as you know, when we go there's not much reaction.
That's right.
And especially with a Canadian guy and an American guy. But all of a sudden, started working. I guess and people got into it, and we're going every move. The moves we're making, people were reacting, and we're wow. It was a pleasant surprise, and really we really had a really good match, and it felt really good, and we were really happy about it, and Rick, I had so much respect for him. There's another guy, we were talking about stamina,
Yeah.
There's another guy that no matter after 20 minutes, 45 minutes, 55 minutes, this guy could go on, and it was really exciting to wrestle him. It was a great experience.
Yeah, does it surprise you that Ric Flair is still out there today? He seems to live his character so much. I can't believe he's still out there.
Oh yeah, it's such a, and he loves it. He lives, wrestling. It's in his bones and his blood. And
right.
This guy, I remember back then, we were both world champions, and we used to talk about our traveling. And remember, back in those days, we never used to travel that much, by getting on planes and stuff. And, would compare, oh man, I gotta do this, I gotta be in Denver that one night, and this, and him, he was happy, the more busy he was, the more he was happy, the happier he was, and he loved it. And nowadays, then I don't watch much wrestling, but I made a point, of watching the match between, was Rick's last match against Shawn Michaels.
Shawn Michaels, yes.
I made sure I watched that match. And oh man, Shawn, another guy that was a lot of respect for, and what a match they had, those two guys. And you have to remember that Rick's age at that match. I mean, unbelievable how he went, and you have to respect that.
Absolutely. Now, as you mentioned earlier, in December of '85, Stan Hansen won the AWA title from you. Again, what was the thinking behind this? Did Vern think, okay, it was time to make a little bit of a change here? What was the thought process here?
Well, it was mutual agreements because I had been champion for 19 months, and my plans to go home had been cut short, really short because of this opportunity. And now my wife, had been patient, and so we wanted to go home, and I mentioned it to Vern, and Vern again wanted to that Japanese connection, and Stan's name came about, and man, I jumped on it. I said, "Oh man, he'd be the greatest guy," and this and that. I mean, I wanted Stan in the worst way, because first he was a friend of mine, and second of all, I knew that the matches we could have, him and I, would be really, really something. With his style at that time, it would be great. So and then Vern thought about it, and then came back, yeah, let's do it, and it was a mutual agreement, We were both happy that it was time to do it.
Right. So and then after that, it was back to the WWF again. And even though it had only been a few years since you were there last, were things because the expansion had started at this point, and were things different than you remembered from the first time you were in the WWF?
Oh yeah, very different. I mean, it wasn't the same at all, completely different. And the television, of course, back in those days we used to do television every 3 weeks, and 3 days, for like 2 days, and but I was when I left the AWA, I got involved with the promotion here in Montreal. International wrestling with
Gino Brito was
and we went on for a while. We did really well, and but again, the TV station managers were really putting a lot of pressure on us to update our production, TV production, and us being a small territories, we couldn't afford the 5-6 cameras, and we had a one handheld camera and one still camera, and that's it.
Yeah.
2 cameras, And Vince had this big production and all that. And back then, in those days, Dan, the stations, the TV stations, used to pay wrestling for the tapes, the wrestling tapes.
Right.
We used to get checks every week from different cities, from different TV stations, and then they would get offers from Vince. Vince would offer them his TV tapes and saying, "Look, it's not going to cost you a dime, and here's the production, great production and all that." So these guys were kind of on nerd. They wanted to say, "Look, So we started investing in our production and getting better quality and all that. But we could tell that we couldn't fight this tsunami, coming over.
The tsunami, that's a good way.
Longer.
That's a good way to describe it. A tsunami.
At that time, it was unbelievable. Vince was like a wrestling tsunami. He was taking over every territories, and it was just a matter of time. So we couldn't fight it any longer. And I went and I got on the plane one day, and I called Vince and I said, "Look, all right, then let's go and let's meet." And I went to meet him, and we started talking about my coming back to WWF, and it was great.
Right. Well, I mean, I used to just quickly, I used to love watching international wrestling just so that I could watch Eddie Creechman do his promos, because he did some of the best promos.
Eddie, oh man, what a guy, what a colorful guy. I mean, these guys, that's what I miss about the wrestling.
Yes.
These guys, Lou Albano and Bobby Heenan and Eddie Creechman,
yep.
and these guys are so colorful. They were great characters, and you couldn't duplicate these guys. And,
no.
So it was a great time. So when I went to WWF, the pool of talents that was there was unbelievable. We used to run 3 nights, 3 towns a night. With three different crews.
Wow.
It was unbelievable. The talent that was there all together in one wrestling territory was unbelievable.
Now,
I remember we'd go to Europe. We'd wrestle one night in London, and then the next night be the other crew in London. 2 nights in a row in every town.
Wow.
And we'd be packed every night. It was unbelievable. Wrestling was so hot. But that was the thing, Dan, is that we used to wrestle like 33 days in a row. It's like madness.
It is.
The weekends we'd wrestle. Would wrestle Saturday afternoon in LA, and then get on a commercial flight right away, and then go on and wrestle in San Francisco that night. The next afternoon, Sunday afternoon, we'd be in St. Louis.
Wow.
And then get on a plane and wrestle in Chicago that night. So we were burned out.
Yeah.
Our bodies were kind of, we were
no time to
it was something else.
Yeah.
No time to recuperate. And I remember when we started to wrestle in Europe, we'd come back in the States, and we'd had like 5 days off so we could recuperate from the jet lag and all that stuff. Then all of a sudden, it lasted for maybe 2 tours. And then the third tour, right away, we'd be wrestling in Berlin the last night in Europe, and then the next night, as soon as we come in the States, we'd be wrestling that night in New York or wherever, and guys were sleeping in the dressing room, and it was unbelievable. It was like crazy,
Now, when you went back to the WWF, were you surprised that you ended up back in like a tag team situation? Because I thought they would maybe try to capitalize on you being a former champion and kind of have you, maybe feud with Hogan or something.
No, well, the tag team was my idea.
Okay.
When I first met Vince, when we had that meeting while I was here in Montreal, International Wrestling, I went to meet him in New York, and so I went in his office, and him and I had a good relationship from back in '80, because as Vince was really a workout addict. He loved to work out.
Yes.
And back in '79, '80, there wasn't that many guys that used to work out. Wrestlers were built, big guys,
like barrels.
But bodybuilders, there weren't that many bodybuilders,
right.
And Vince and I, we used to talk sometimes at TV about working out and different routines and stuff. So we had a good relationship. So when we met in '85, in '87, late '86 that I met him. He told me, he says, Rick, listen, what would you like? And I remember that was his exact word. He says, look, you tell me what you want. He says, just look at it this way, like you have a magic wand, and you tell me what you want, and I'll make it happen, And at that time, I met this guy, Tom Zink.
Right.
And Tom looked like a younger me, and we kind of looked alike, and we had a similar style. So we met, and I saw him in Winnipeg the first time, and right away I said, well, yeah, sure, this guy some moves that he kind of. So I decided to bring him into Montreal International Wrestling, and then we wrestled together a couple of times, and I knew there was big potential between him and I. We could tag team and eventually make something really big, and it could have been something really, really big, because we had that Can-Am connection.
Yep.
The name was my idea because back then, the marketing, the merchandising
Yep.
and stuff, we could have done well in Canada and could have done well in the States.
That's
and,
right.
The whole thing. And Vince loved the idea. And then when we teamed up, he was in love with our whole thing. And we used to do different moves also. We made sure that we innovated with different moves.
Yeah.
It was back in '87. It wasn't really something that guys did. The routines we had was very different. And anyway, so. And in the back of my mind, even back then, I knew I wanted to become a heel eventually. And I had it in my mind that later I would turn against Tom and then have this really, really big feud with him and I, and it would have been great, like the two brothers almost, and we split, and the jealousy, the younger guy, the older, it would have been great.
Yeah, it's classic.
But, Tom, eventually, all of a sudden, I guess it was too much for him, and he just, he went away. He went on with this rumor that said that, was making more money than he was, but it was his way of getting out of it, because, Vince never did that, tag teams, he paid the same money, and that was it, and,
what?
Because you can't start that. If you start doing that, then it becomes a complicated situation.
Sure, absolutely.
So from your question, Dan, that sure, I started as a tag team because it was my idea, and I felt great about that. And like I said, I had a plan of switching heel. And then when Tom walked out on me right there and then, didn't leave us any opportunities to do something about it, and
right.
So they decided to replace him with Tito, and then we became Strike Force.
Right.
And again, I always had in the back of my mind, that I wanted to become a heel because when I started in pro wrestling, my brother was a heel,
Okay.
So I used to travel with the heels a lot, and it was like a thing, I used to like to hang around with the heels a lot more than the baby faces. I like the heels. I like their attitude and all that, and the way they were. Baby faces tended to be more prima donnas and stuff, and I wasn't comfortable with that,
Yeah.
So eventually, I'm the one that proposed to Vince about switching heel on Tito. And his first reaction was like, "Oh no, Rick, impossible." Nobody could see it.
Well, you know what? Because Rick, you were so good as a babyface. Like you were such a convincing babyface, which is a really, really, really hard thing to do. And because I remember when you did the switch and you switched to the model, I was blown away at how good you were as a heel. Because I'm like, I would have never thought of Rick Martel as a heel.
Yeah, yes, and you're alone. Believe me, almost everybody, didn't agree with that idea. And in fact, Vince told me no. The first time he said no, Rick, and I went back at him. And he said no, we can't. I don't see it. I really don't see it. And I went to the point. I was so. Because I'd been in wrestling at that time for 15 years as a babyface. And I knew I had it in me, and I wanted to have some, a challenge, and a creative challenge.
Sure,
and I knew
sure.
And I knew that the heel kind of lead the match.
Yes, yes.
And I wanted to do that. I wanted the opportunity of doing that, and so he said no a couple of times, and then finally I said, well, if I don't do it here, I'm going to do it somewhere else. And I gave my notice, and I left.
Wow.
So and I had contacted Japan, and I had contacted the other territories, and I was at home in Florida, and all of a sudden the phone rang, and Vince, I answered the phone and says, Rick, Vince, oh, Vince, how are you? And finally he says, Rick, listen, all right, I'll tell you what. He says, WWF doesn't need Rick Martel, and Rick Martel doesn't need WWF, all right? So let's go from there. So he says, how about you get on the plane and come and meet, and we'll talk about what you're mentioned about switching heel, and maybe we'll find a way, And then I went and met him, and then he says, okay, let's do it this way, and then I did. And I remember, when I did it in Atlantic City, the first guy that, when I walked out the ring, and Hulk right away was there, and because Hulk and I were roommates with the AWA,
right.
I was roommates for a few months with Hulk, and right away, when I came out, I came in the dressing room. Hulk came to say, "Oh, Rick, man, I'm sure it's gonna work, man. I know it. I feel it. It just feels right, And he was the first one to encourage me. And the next day, we were doing television in upstate New York, and I walked out to the ring, and the reaction was fantastic. Everybody was booing me. I knew it was gonna work. So, and then from there, the gimmick, the model gimmick, was like. Because I didn't have a gimmick, I knew I wanted to be a heel, but
what kind? Yeah,
everybody had a gimmick at that time,
sure,
but I hadn't put much idea, much thought to it, and Vince and J.J. Dillon came up with the idea, about being a model, and I remember when Vince first told me the idea, I said, the model, man, what kind of heat am I gonna generate from that? And I remember I called my wife that night. I said, look, do you want to put a gimmick on me called, they want to call me the model, and I was kind of disappointed, so my wife said, well, let's put it this way, it could have been worse. They could have asked you to be a rooster,
that one,
a gimmick, Red Rooster.
Yeah, that one went to Terry Taylor.
Yeah, probably the worst gimmick ever, so I said, well, you have a point there. You're right. And from that moment on, I went starting into a creative mode, and started thinking of all these arrogance and all this stuff, and the catwalks and all that. And I loved it.
I got to tell you,
really enjoyed it.
I got to tell you, Rick, you were brilliant as the model. Like, me and my buddies, we were all in high school at that point, and seriously, we just thought you were the best, man. You'd have that big button that said, "Yes, I'm a model," and the can of arrogance, obviously, and the sunglasses, and your hair pulled back, and we thought, A, it was a great gimmick, and B, we were blown away because we never thought Rick Martel could pull it off so well, and you were fabulous as the model.
Oh, thank you very much, man. It was really a great time for me, and it's fantastic, and also what's great is that for my first feud as a model, against Tito, and it was great because Tito was such a professional, and to be wrestling him, having him as a babyface,
right.
Oh man, it's great, and so it, I really, really enjoyed that. It really gave me the juice to keep going, and to enjoy still what I was doing.
Yeah. Now, all this stuff like the can of arrogance, and you came up with all that stuff yourself?
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was all my ideas, and the catwalks and all the different stuff, because Vince, at that time there were so many gimmicks, and he didn't have time to, to do. And there was like 2-3 towns a night.
Sure.
And he had so much on his plate.
Right.
That it was up to the individual wrestler to come up with his ideas or whatever. It was like, hey, look, we're giving you the ball and run with it.
Right. Right.
So I remember, I'd call him, and say, hey, look, Vince, how about this? How about if I do these catwalks and all that? Oh, yeah, sure. Well, Vince, I have to go and buy different clothes. Oh, well, okay, we'll give you a budget, to go buy what you want, and he'd say yes to everything I said, and it was great because I really had a leeway with him where he gave me the green light on pretty much everything I asked, and
it was so smart, so well done. I think one of the best things about it too was the vignettes that you did before we even saw you in the ring. You did all these great vignettes, with the brilliant. They're all available on YouTube to watch, and I was watching them.
I had so much fun doing these And I remember, the camera guys and all that, when they say, okay, cut, everybody would be laughing.
For sure.
So that was a lot of fun, and I think, like you said, I think a lot, the people appreciated it, and the fact that I'd back it up with wrestling,
yes,
I'd get
exactly.
in the ring, and I'd really, wrestle hard and all that, and I think the both combinations, it worked out well.
Yeah, it certainly did. Now, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me right, for a little while as the model, did you have Slick as your manager?
Yeah, I had. I remember they gave me they gave me a manager. When I first started, I can't remember his name for Slick.
Yeah, Slick.
Yeah. So they gave me Slick as a manager, and Slick, would go in there, and even when I was working the ring, his style was pretty much you wanted the cameras to be on him as much, as he could, and I'd be in there trying to build up the heat and all that, and then he'd be outside doing some stuff, and it would take away from what I was doing in the ring.
Right.
And then in the interviews it was the same thing, it'd go on, and it would give me much room to talk and to do my stuff. And so finally, I liked him. It wasn't a personal thing. It was like business.
Right.
I went to see Vince. I said, look, I'd like to do it on my own. I don't think it's going to work out with him, with Slick. I like him, but professionally, I don't think we can work together. And so he did. He said, okay, all right, very good, let's try it. And I did, and I'm glad I did.
Yeah.
Then I could do all my stuff, and I could get over myself, and get the heat on myself.
Right. Well, the thing
that made a big difference.
Yeah, and plus, you were very talented. You knew what the gimmick was about. You knew how to do the promos. Guys like Slick are for the guys like the Barbarian that can't talk or anything like that. Someone like you didn't need the mouthpiece because you could do all the talking yourself.
Yeah, and to get that cheap heat from the outside manager, I didn't need that either. I could get my heat myself and build it, so all that was really great. I had some great matches, and then up to the blindfold, with
we have
Jake.
We have to talk about the blindfold match because
So that was really great. That was probably the peak there. I was red hot after this match, and I remember we did this angle, with the arrogance on Jake, and then really got over like $1 million.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
People really bought it, and I had such great heat everywhere I went, and Jake, wow, what a guy. His gimmick, the snake was just great, and the way, his ring psychology, the way he worked, his interviews, he was really fantastic to work with. So then they came up with that idea. Jake, came up with that idea about the blindfold, and he had done it a couple of times, but I never did, and I said, oh man, I don't know, how comfortable, because as you know, Dan, in wrestling, in pro wrestling, face expression is a lot.
Right.
You're angry, you're scared, your face tells the story a lot, and now, with the blindfold on top, on your head, how are you going to create that emotion and all that stuff? And I said, at first I was a little bit cold about the idea, and eventually, we had a couple meetings, with Vince, and says, yeah, sure, and Jake, told me about the experiences he had. So we had a dry run in West Palm Beach. We tried it one night.
Okay.
So we tried it, and and then it really felt, and we got a great reaction, and it felt good. I could tell, that I could do something with it, and
wow.
So I said, yeah, maybe we can have fun with it, and and it'll be great. And then, you know, we went out with it. We said, okay, let's do it.
For that match, because I know, you know, a seasoned pro like yourself and Jake Roberts, you guys wouldn't, if it was a regular match, you would just probably call it all in the ring and let it unfold. But for something like the blindfold match, I'm guessing the two of you must have sat down and worked out some certain spots in advance.
Oh yeah, definitely. We had to because, as you say, you know, I mean, it's such a different match. I mean, it's such unusual match that you have to create those situations. You have to build into these situations. So we couldn't go there just and just try it off like that. I mean, it had to be planned. We knew you know what we had to do and how to get there. You know, and take our time and do it at the right time, because it was very important. Because first of all, not to get hurt, and second of all, for the reaction. You know, I mean, the crowd reaction. And like I said, I was so happy about, because it made it so much easier. You know, with the crowd reaction. Because, you know, like, you know, he'd put his hands out there. And people, they scream. So we went along with it. We played with that, and man, it was fantastic. It was really a great souvenir for me.
The model character, you know, Jake the Snake Roberts, you know, guys like Ravishing Rick Rude. You had all these great characters back in the 80s, and nowadays you just don't get this. You don't seem to see that as much in wrestling, and I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on why everybody looks the same now when you watch wrestling, and whereas you guys were all unique individual personalities that stood out.
Yeah, and I think that's what is hurting a little bit now is don't get me wrong. I mean, guys, a lot of respect for the guys. You know, everybody's working hard and looking good and stuff. But I think back in the days, in those days, everybody was a lot different from each other. You know, different characters are really different and didn't look alike, and we. And I think that's what that was the strength of, you know, it's like you go see an event somewhere, you know, and you see different things every night. But if it's kind of repeating throughout the night, I say, well, it's you know, it's a little bit the same as the other, and it's not having the same effect this way. But just to come back to that night, the blindfold, you know, that time there, Dan, if I may, I just want to say a little something, you know.
Sure.
When after this match, you know, the model was, you know, that gimmick, the whole thing was like red hot, you know. I mean, it was probably, you know, I mean, it was certainly the peak of it. And I think a lot of people don't know it, but I had a big decision after this match to take, you know, to make. I mean, I had a big business opportunity here in Quebec that was proposed to me, and so I had to choose between my wrestling career and this business opportunity, and I took the latter, you know, the business opportunity, and I remember, you know, I had a meeting with Vince, and I told him, and he couldn't believe it, you know. He says, "Oh, Rick, you know, everything is, you know," and I'm sure, you know, it didn't please those guys but you know, it sure, that decision hurt me later on, you know, when I came back, because, you know, of course they couldn't trust me after that, you know. He says, well, if we put, or, you know, if we go with him, he may leave any time, you know. So it did hurt me, but now where I'm at today, I mean, I'm glad I made that decision, because now, as you know, Dan, in wrestling, we don't have a union.
That's
you know?
right.
We don't have a front pension, you know.
Right.
I mean, you know, and back in those days, we didn't make the kind of money that these guys are making today.
Sure.
You know? If I was making $1.5 million a year or something like that, I mean, back then, I would have said, hey, crap, no way.
Yeah.
And I'll be able to, one day, when I retire from wrestling, I'll be able to say, hey, well, at least it was worth it. But back then we weren't making that great money. You know, it was great money, but not to where you could, after the wrestling, your career was over, you could retire or take it easy or whatever. You had to think about your future, you know. And so I made that decision, and it certainly hurt me later on as far as my wrestling career. But as far as my life, my family life, and what I'm doing now, you know, my business now is doing fantastic, and I'm glad I did. But I have to admit, when I came back, my pride was really hurt, you know. I mean,
sure.
I remember when I wrestled against Tatanka, you know,
right,
at
yes.
WrestleMania, the first WrestleMania, and I was coming back, and I remember the agent came to me and says, Rick, you know, we want Tatanka to go over, you know, and oh man, I said, Christ, I said, you know, I'm just coming back, and you know, and there was no angle, no nothing after, you know, there was nothing. So I remember, you know, I went to see Vince. Hey, Vince, you know, what's the matter, you know? But you know, now that I look back on it, you know, I can't blame him at all. Like I said, from then on, he couldn't trust me. You know, he couldn't put any heat on me because you know, at any time he knew that my priorities wrestling wasn't number one. So he needed guys that their priorities were wrestling. That's it. And that was a business decision on his part. So, but I have to admit, you know, that my pride, you know, but again, I needed the money because I needed to reinvest in my business.
Sure.
Here. So I did that, but so that's why I made a comeback in '98 with WCW.
Right.
And that's another thing that not many people know. In late '97, in fall '97, I had a meeting with Vince again to come back again in the ring, because now my business was doing great. I had people, you know, managing it, and I could leave, and everything was great. You know, I could be away, and there wouldn't be no problem. So it was going on its own. So I wanted to come back into wrestling to really finish it right. I had this sense that, you know, my career was great and all that, but it didn't finish on the right note like I wanted. So I wanted to come back and say, hey, look, I want to come back on my terms. And then, you know, so I had a meeting with Vince, and there was this guy from Winnipeg. You know, we were going to team up together, and he eventually, Cyrus, you know.
Don Callis.
Don
Callis.
Yeah, Don and I were going to come back. We had a meeting with Don, and I had met Don in Winnipeg working, you know, he was working the independent circuit, and this guy was a great talker.
He was.
And I said, you know, the long hair and all that, and that'd be great. I says, you know, we could later on go, you know, come back as a team, and then later on he could switch on me, you know, and he would become, I would be the baby face, you know, the older guy, and him, the younger guy, the cocky guy.
Right.
You know, you're riding my coattails kind of stuff, you know, and you know, you would knock me in because I was older and I needed him, and this, you know, we had the whole thing planned out. So I met Vince with the idea, and he loved it. We were going to be called the supermodels, you know, because of that little different thing, you know, back in the 80s, right?
Supermodels,
in the 90s were the supermodels instead of the models, and we're going to have the vignettes. We're going to do the vignette. Everything was lined up. We're going to do the vignettes at that Fashion Cafe in New York, you know, and I remember Vince, you know, and back then the yearly contracts started. You know, guys would get yearly contract, you know, like an amount of money for the year. And so I remember Vince says, well, okay, Rick, says, what kind of arrangements you want, you know? And I said, well, of course, you know, I'd like a yearly contract, you know. Sure, say, whatever, you know, great, you know. So now, you know, we went back and after the meetings, and then we went to work for Emile Dupré in the Maritimes, because, you know, I hadn't been in the ring for a couple of years, you know, so I wanted to get my ring shape back on.
Right.
And over there in the summer for Dupré, you could wrestle every night, the Maritime, so that would help me get my wind back. And I remember, the guys we worked against every night was a Christian and the other guy Edge.
Yeah, Christian and Edge.
And Christian were tag team.
Wow.
And we worked every night. And these guys were just young guys starting out.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, I was the old timer of the four, and we had some, all kinds of matches, lumberjack matches, and all kinds of different matches. And they never had these matches. So I would, we'd have meetings, and I say, okay, you do this, do that, and so we had a really good summer. We really enjoyed it, and these guys, their attitude, you could tell even then that these guys were going to do something. Wow. They were going to really have great careers.
Which they did. Yeah, they did.
And so then, I was in New Brunswick, and all of a sudden, I get the contract by mail, by FedEx, and I remember I opened this envelope, and I looked this letter and the contracts, and it was like a 3 months contract, like a tryout thing,
Oh, really?
And man, I was hot. Yeah, I was really disappointed. I was very disappointed because, we talked about a yearly thing.
Sure.
And of course, at that time, as the guys handling the contracts was, Brother Love.
Pritchard. Pritchard.
Yeah. So I talked to Pritchard. I called him right away. I said, look, Bruce, I said, what is this? I said, we talked about a yearly contract. Yeah, Rick, but, you have to keep in mind, that if it was you alone, it'd be fine, but you have this guy that we don't know, we and I can see his point, that they couldn't tell how it was going to work because the other guy didn't know him.
Right.
And, Evo Adam, they didn't know him. So anyway, I said, all right, I thought about it, and I couldn't, at this point in my career, I just couldn't go on a tryout,
Sure.
I thought at this point, I said, look, I can't do it, it's on or not. It's on or it's off,
Yeah, sure.
So I took the phone, first I talked with Don, and I explained to him, look, it's not like you, you're a young guy, you're starting, sure, but me, it's my last hooray, that's it, it's my last comeback, So finally I said, look, if you want, I'm calling Eric Bischoff, and if you want to come with me there, I'm not sure we'll have that opportunity because that gimmick, we can't do that gimmick because of the copyrights and stuff. I says, but I says we can do something else or whatever, But him, he was like a big. Of course, I can't blame him because he was like a big WWF fan.
Right.
For him, he wanted to go to WWF. He didn't want to go to WCW.
Right.
So I called Eric Bischoff, and Eric knew me from the AWA days. He was the announcer back then.
Yeah.
So hey, Rick, sure, just get on the plane tomorrow and come and meet me. Sure, would love to have you. It'd be great. And so I went to meet him and negotiated a contract, a yearly contract, and the biggest contract of my career. And it was fantastic. And so I went there, and just as Rick Martel, and I worked, babyface, heel, it was like.
And you looked amazing. You looked amazing, by the way, too, when you came back to WCW. I was very impressed.
Yeah, thank you. I was 42 years old.
Yeah.
I had 25 years of wrestling under my belt, and that's why, Dan, I wanted to come back in a really good shape and finish it on the right note, and I thought I established that. I came back and they put the television title on me. I worked against
Booker T.
Booker T. But I could tell then there was a big difference from my days. I could tell now the wrestling wasn't the same now.
Yeah.
Guys would go in the ring, and you had to know every single move that you did.
Right.
And I says, well, what is this? You know, I mean, sure, yeah. Because back in the days, you do couples, you knew couple spots and the finish, and that was it.
Right,
you know?
right.
And you go there and see it, how the people reacted, and you play with the crowd reaction,
right.
the psychology, and all that. And now all that was gone, and I remember before each match I was there, and gotta do this, gotta do that, gotta do this, that drive me crazy.
Wow.
It drove me crazy.
Yeah.
I couldn't adjust to that, and so anyway, after a couple injuries, I got two major injuries in the last 6 months, and guys, again, to my point I was making earlier, we were talking about that, Dan, earlier in the interview, is that guys were put in a situation where they didn't have time to learn.
Right.
So, like Booker T, who happens, I like him a lot, he's a great guy, but back then he was put in in certain situation, but he didn't wrestle that much.
Right.
He didn't know, because the main thing about wrestling is to take care of each other. If I'm going to try to make a move, I have to make sure that you're protected.
Yes.
I'm not going to do something that's going to hurt you and then put you out of your career.
Right. Of course.
I have a duty to take care of you. If I'm going to hurt everybody I work with, and so anyway, I went on and I worked with him. He wanted to do all these spots, and these guys, again, not only him but other guys, and I'm going, Jesus Christ, and they were hurting each other, and me, I was 42 years old now. I didn't need this, and also I had my business. I didn't want to walk away from there with an injury that would keep me handicapped for the rest of my life.
Sure.
I wasn't a young guy starting out. I was just to me it was just to prove a point. I was coming back just to make a statement, and so anyway, after two injuries, major injuries, I said, well, that's it. That's enough for me. I injured my knee really bad. I had a major injury, and then I got myself back in shape. 3 months. I came back.
Right.
My first night I wrestled against Stevie Ray, and I had my last match was against Stevie Ray. In July 13th, 1998 in Vegas. And I remember that night, I said, look, Stevie, my knee's kind of, it's my first night, and I had a protective knee brace.
Yeah.
And again, Stevie, really nice guy. I love him, a really great guy and all that. But again, he didn't know what to do to work around this injury.
Right.
And then I remember he suggested that move. He did, and I said, well, can we do something else? Well, Rick, I don't know, if I can do something else. This is what I'm used to. If it would have been back in the day, sure, Rick, there's hundreds of things we can do. We could have worked something.
Yeah.
And anyway, in this finish there at the end, I was supposed to, I landed flat on my face, and at the last minute, I used my knee to use, so the weight wouldn't be all on my face. I got a gun shy, and instead of trying some other way, I used my knee and my neck. Sorry, it was the other way around. I was supposed to use my knee, to soften the fall.
Right.
But instead, I used my neck, my head.
Oh, okay.
And right at that second, I heard a pop in my neck.
Ouch.
And I went, holy shit, I said, that's it, man. I said, at that second, right there at that second, I said, it's over. That's it for me, And that match, at the end of this match, I worked an angle with, I had just, Bret Hart came in,
yes.
and before that move, hit me with a chair on my head, and Bret and I were going to work something, after that. So I remember I came back in the shower, I'm in the dressing room, and I said, fuck this, and Bret, what's going on? I said, that's it, man. I'm finished. Well,
yeah.
You can't, are you sure? Yes, yeah, that's it. That's over, and I never wrestled since.
Wow. It must have been a tad upsetting though, Rick, to, like you said, you wanted to kind of put that final ending on the career, and you go back and it's kind of like a whole different ball game than what you're used to.
Yeah, it was. I have to admit, it was disappointing. The things that were changing, and it wasn't the same anymore, and it was a different world. So I had to say, well, I tried, and but I was satisfied in what I accomplished. At 42 years old and all that, and and I was happy, and and like I said, I finished. Guys, a lot of respect for what I did in that year. Those just a few months, and I had, it was the biggest contract I've ever had, and I enjoyed working, for WCW. It was very exciting, this whole thing, with the New World Order and all that. So it was a lot of fun to be around that, and there was a good atmosphere, good chemistry there, and good energy, and it was great. It was a lot of fun.
What do you basically do to keep your time now? Is it the real estate? Is it apartment buildings? What is the business now for Rick Martel?
Yeah, well, see, the opportunity I had back in '91 back then was to buy a medical clinic.
Okay.
A friend of mine was. Knew of this guy that owned it, and he wanted to get out of it. He wanted to sell it. He wanted to retire, and then this friend of mine knew. He said, "Look, this is the greatest opportunity you could have had," and also I bought some real estate a little bit, and then I came in there and renovated the whole thing, and that's what I do. I buy a building and renovate it,
okay.
and sell it, and but I'm not into much of selling now. I manage it now.
Right.
Right. So that's what I do now, and also I have a 11-year-old daughter. And so
she keeps you busy. Yeah, for sure. Well,
and what's great about it, Dan, is that now I have a lot of time, for me and my family, as opposed to, to where I, when I was in the wrestling.
Right.
We used to travel like crazy.
Sure.
And my wife and I, we've been married 28 years now, and she was patient, all these years, and so now at least we have some time to spend together. We have a really good time, and I really enjoy it. I still keep in shape. I work out still 3 times a week. And,
nice.
I watch my weight. It's the one thing I always, that helped me in the wrestling business. I'm very disciplined. About my eating habits. And still to this day, I, we go somewhere and someone, we want some cake, and so no. I still have it, it's old habits die hard, and, but I feel good, and so. Well, I just wanted I'm really happy how it turned out.
To quickly mention too that and thank you so much for sitting down and talking over this long. This is Rick. This has been totally amazing. I just want to talk to you a little bit about the Wrestle Reunion show you're going to do here in Toronto in April, the 13th and 14th. How do you feel about doing these shows and meeting the fans? That must be a pretty enjoyable experience for you.
Yeah, it's great. I really enjoy that because it's a win-win situation because first of all, I get to see the guys that I've been on the road with.
Right.
It's like here in Quebec City. I mean, I'm the only wrestler here in this town. So there's not other other guys that I can they can relate to what I'm talking about.
Right.
Sometimes So when I get to see all these guys, like for instance at the Wrestle Reunion here in Toronto, Roddy Piper. I mean, Roddy is like a brother to me. I mean, we were roommates in 1979 in Portland, Oregon. You know? And we stayed close up until today. I mean, we don't see much of each other. We don't talk much, but when I get to see him at these events, it's great. And Tito will be there,
yes.
and Gene Okerlund, you know,
yep.
Mean Gene. I mean, from you know, the AWA
That's
days.
right.
I mean, man, this guy, Mean Gene. I mean, the greatest. You know, I mean, what a guy. I mean, he's fantastic. And also Animal, you know, the Road Warrior,
yep.
Animal, and these are all guys that I enjoyed seeing again. It's fantastic to go to these events, so I get to see these guys again because, you know, we lived a different life, an unusual profession, and we shared some special moments.
Right.
You know, I mean, some great moments. You know, it's like some moments, like for instance, that you know, WrestleMania 3, you know, or 93,000 people. I mean, you know, unbelievable. You know, the atmosphere and the crowd and all that, and you know, at the Wembley Stadium, 85,000 people, and so on, and a lot of other things that we lived and together, and now we can again see each other and share these moments. So it's great, and like I said, the win-win situation, and then I get to see again the fans. And it's fun, you know. They'll be in line autographs and stuff, and then say, "Oh, Rick, I remember this day, and they relive it." And I do too. And we talk about this certain match on a certain place, and I remember all these days that they talk about, you know. And then we relive this moment together, the fans and myself. So we share these good memories together, and it's fun. So I get to exchange with the fans these things, and it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy these wrestle reunions.
Awesome. Well, I have really enjoyed sitting here talking with you, Rick. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk to us. Us here at the Law Live Audio Wrestling, we're going to have a booth as well at Wrestle Reunion. So I'm really hoping that you'll come by and say hello. I'm gonna hunt you down and get some more stories out of you. Oh, one other thing I have to tell you.
Well, I'll tell you what, Dan. The hunting won't be hunting. I'll be hunting for you too. I'm looking forward to meet the man behind the voice. And you know, I thank you also to you and TSN Radio to giving me this opportunity to share some moments of my wrestling career. And
absolutely,
I'm really appreciative of it. And again, I have to say, you know, you're wrestling pretty good.
Oh, thank you.
You know, it's great when you do an interview and the interviewer knows wrestling, knows what he's talking about.
Oh,
and, and I really enjoy that.
That's great. I've been watching Rick Martel for a long time. One other thing I have to tell you, because I don't know if you know this or not, but there actually is a cologne in France called Arrogance.
Oh, no, you're kidding me.
No, I'm not, because a friend of mine, a few years ago, he was traveling in Europe, and he came back, and he goes, Dan, I found this. He goes, I had to buy this for you. And it's a box of Arrogance. I know, I couldn't believe it. I'm like, oh, my God.
That's great.
So,
man,
I think I'm going to bring it. I'm going to bring it to Wrestle Reunion, and I'm going to make you autograph it.
I get a kick out of this one. Oh, man, that's good.